by 2030. I mean, this is going to be the scheduled plans. A lot depends heavily on politics and economics of the planet itself. That's the big. I mean, these particular missions have been funded for a period of time, so the money's already there. What goes on beyond, say, 2025 into 2030 does depend on politics and economics. But by 2030, we should start to see the first base on the moon where scientists can carry out the work. And remember, there's going to be the gateway, the orbiting space station around the moon for crews to actually live and work.
NASA's Orion spacecraft will attempt to fly further than any human-intended spacecraft has ever gone before, with a 1.3 million mile round trip to the far side of the moon. The Artemis mission will be unmanned, but if successful, it's thought it could inspire a generation. Well, let's talk to space expert Andrew Lound, who's been following the mission closely. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
What is the significance of this Artemis mission? It's unmanned. What is its purpose?
Its purpose really is to test the equipment out, which will be sending humans to Mars in probably 2025. So the first thing you've got to try and do is test the whole system up, really, which is a new rocket system, the SLS system, which is a derivative of the space shuttle system. So you've got this one central tank of liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen, and two solid boosters strapped to the side of it. And testing the new spacecraft, of course, the Orion space capsule, part of which is being built by the European Space Agency, the service module unit. And the idea is to send this on its mission towards the moon, which will do a long elliptical orbit around the moon. So at its closest point, it's about 64 miles, and its furthest point would be about 40,000 miles. So you've got a long elliptical orbit going around the moon, and it'll stay there for a period of time. It'll carry out a number of experiments. Apart from the engineering experiments of the spacecraft itself, it'll actually be releasing some what's called small CubeSats, small satellites, one of which is a solar sail, which actually will sail off to an asteroid to do some research. It's going to do some orbiters around the moon, which will be studying the moon itself, looking for water ice. And it'll be dropping a Japanese lander onto the surface of the moon. And the experiments on board the spacecraft include 3 mannequins, and these mannequins will be used to test the radiation effects of space on the mannequins themselves, because it's got new protection on board to protect astronauts from radiation, which is the biggest problem when you go into the moon. So that research will be carried out while the mission is in progress. And when it's done its period of time orbiting the moon, it'll come back towards the Earth and do a high angle re-entry and splash down in the ocean, where it'll be recovered then, and the recovery teams will practice their routine for bringing the spacecraft back. And if all this works perfectly well, in 2024, we'll see a human mission to go around the moon. They won't be landing, but they'll be going around the moon. And then hopefully a year later, the first humans for 50 years will land on the surface of the moon.
And Andrew, what is I suppose the advantage is always testing out the equipment, as you said, sort of going step by step. First unmanned, then manned, then actually setting foot on the moon. But what is the interest in going back to the moon with a manned mission where they land on the moon? Because we know there's no chance of us settling on the moon, so to speak. Mars is where the focus is going to be. So what's the interest around the moon?
Number of factors really on this. Resources on the Earth are becoming limited, and there are problems taking resources out of the Earth. Things like what they call rare earth metals, which are becoming harder and harder to actually dig out of the Earth. These are quite in abundance on asteroids and on the moon itself. There's an isotope of helium called helium-3, which is bound up in the soil on the moon. This cannot exist on the Earth. And this is quite an important isotope for nuclear fusion power stations of the future. So the research to go to the moon really and to put bases there will be really for commercial purposes, for minerals, as much as anything else for taking off the surface. And this is actually not just this mission. The Artemis is combining a lot of Western nations working together to do this work, but they actually are in a race with China in particular, who have made it quite clear they have every intention in going to the moon and withdrawing minerals and materials from that. I mean, as for settling on place, you could settle on the moon. Some suggestions actually of going into caverns underneath in volcanic vents and volcanic tubes which exist on the moon. But if you're going to go to Mars, which everybody wants to do, everyone wants to settle on Mars, You're going to have to start that process somewhere, and that process will start on the moon, where you'll learn all the techniques needed to actually survive on Mars and to live on Mars. And of course, Mars is going to be is a long lot further away, so the moon is a much better place to rehearse and to practice that operation.
I remember being sort of quite surprised that even 50 years ago, when the first mission to the moon was took place, people were still talking about Mars then. There was serious consideration of not going to the moon and trying for Mars straight away.
Yes, I mean, Mars has been fascinating. It's fascinated humanity for a long, long, long period of time. Basically, because a lot of it was due to the 1877 observations of Mars, when Schiaparelli saw what he called canali, which he meant linear features on Mars, and people thought they meant canals.
Right.
And first of all, they promoted the idea that Martians lived on the planet. So there's been this obsession with Mars for a long period of time of perhaps life being out there. And the more missions that actually went to Mars, the more we realized there is no life on Mars. But suddenly, when the later missions went, we found Mars was a far more interesting place than we thought. It has a lot of interesting geology. It's a lot of interesting activity has gone on Mars. And we're still suspicious that maybe microorganisms might exist on Mars at all. And of course, it's a planet with an atmosphere. It's a very thin atmosphere, it must be said, of carbon dioxide. But it is a little bit more Earth-like, obviously, than the moon itself, which is desolate of any kind of an atmosphere at all. And everybody feels the possibility they're drawn to a planet. Venus is completely way off of surviving on the surface of Venus. The atmospheric pressure is too high. The atmosphere is far too dense. So Mars is the only real planet within reach that we could actually live on properly.
And Andrew, before we go, how long do you reckon till we see some sort of scientific colony on the moon? Are we talking in the next 5 years, or are we talking decades?
I think by 2030, I mean, this is going to be the scheduled plans. A lot depends heavily on politics and economics of the planet itself. That's the big, I mean, these particular missions have been funded for a period of time, so the money's already there. What goes on beyond, say, 2025 into 2030 does depend on politics and economics. But by 2030, we should start to see the first base on the moon where scientists can carry out the work. And remember, there's going to be the gateway, the orbiting space station around the moon for crews to actually live and work.
Quite fascinating. And also fascinating that even though we're 50 years on, there's still a race. There's still a race of who's going to get there first. Is it going to be NASA or is it going to be China?
Absolutely. This is a real competition going on at the moment. And it's an economic competition, interesting enough, not just for brinkmanship. This is about economics and about mineral rights.
Andrew, thank you so much for explaining it all so beautifully. And also, thank you. I know people can't see you, but thank you for your wonderful jumper that you're wearing, which looks like an astronaut spacesuit. It's absolutely brilliant.